Hey there, dudes. I'm Channel Master Jake, and last week I got a little negative. So this week I figured I would talk about something maybe a little more positive. And so today I decided that what we're going to be talking about today is Spider-Man the animated series versus the Spectacular Spider-Man. Which one is better? Now, the general consensus amongst all the Spider-Man cartoons that have come out with, there's been a lot. There's been Ultimate Spider-Man, and there's been Spider-Man Unlimited, and there's been that weird 2000s one. Does anyone remember that one at all? I think it had the guy from How I Met Your Mother in it, if it helps anybody. So there's been a lot, but generally people seem to say that, the animated series or Spectacular, one of those is usually, the superior show. So today I figured I would look at them and I would tell you which one I think is, in fact, the better show. So today we're going to be looking at 5 different categories. At least I kind of distilled them into 5 categories. These are the 5 things that I think make a really good Spider-Man cartoon. He's my favorite Marvel hero. He's my favorite superhero ever. So I hold him in pretty high esteem. And the 5 things that I think that really make a really good Spider-Man cartoon would be characters, music, the animation, because it is a cartoon after all, story, and because it is an action show, fight scenes. If you don't have good action, it's going to be kind of a boring ride. And before anybody gets all upset or anything, these are just my personal opinions, yada yada yada. I'd love to hear what other people think. Maybe that weird that early 2000s one, that really weird CG one, maybe that's your favorite. Tell me why. I might think it's really weird, but tell me why. Alright, so the first category I'm going to go over is animation between these two shows. Now, one thing you probably should know, I was born in the 90s, so I grew up with Spider-Man the animated series. It still holds a really special place in my heart because of it. I grew up with it. It's something that I really do love. And when it comes to the animation is actually pretty dang good. The designs are a little more realistic looking. The characters were aged up considerably. Spider-Man is normally a teenager, unless when he's a college student. He's going to, I think it was Empire State University, the fictional school in the Marvel Universe or whatever. And so he's aged up. All his other characters are aged up, so it's more like young 20-something sort of hijinks instead of high school hijinks, The one drawback that the animation does have, though, it's usually really slow. Now, when I say slow, I don't mean like they're moving like they're through molasses. I mean, the animations are usually it can be kind of a little stilted at times because, it is on a budget. Animations usually are. They got to find a way to cut corners. And so they're more blocky. It's a little slower moving. It doesn't go as fast. Now comes along Spectacular Spider-Man, which was like 2007 or so. It decided to go like the completely other way with it. Instead of making it more realistic, it went really cartoony. It's like, we're going to go way stylized, and we're going to go way different. And because it did go way stylized, it kind of simplified things, but in exchange for that, the animation is usually a lot faster. In a few instances, it's actually a little too fast, Characters are kind of zipping around a little too fast, and you're like, whoa, what am I watching here? Everyone's kind of moving around way too fast. But in the end, in the grand scheme of things, I think I actually prefer Spectacular Spider-Man. Not that the animated series is bad. Matter of fact, their design for Peter Parker is probably still really iconic. And the suit is still really iconic. I prefer the way the suit looks in that show. It's just, it moves too slow for me. It really does. And Spider-Man is a fast character. He's got spider speed and spider agility and a spider sense where he's kind of moving around, and I don't know why he moved it like that. I can't do it, but he zips around really fast. And that's just, it's how Spider-Man should be. Even though the animation and the designs are simplified and more cartoonish, it allows the animation to be way more fluid and be way faster. which in a superhero show is one thing that you do need. So in my opinion, the point goes to Spectacular Spider-Man for better animation. Alright, next up we're going to be talking about the music. Now this section is going to actually be pretty short, because, well, they're superhero shows. It's not like you're watching like Adventure Time or something where a much greater emphasis is placed on the music and on the songs. They're superhero shows. They've got more happy, upbeat songs for when they're happy, more action-y songs when they're going at it. Nothing too much hits home about it. The only good thing about either cartoon when it comes to music is the opening theme songs. They're both really good. They're both upbeat, they're both catchy, they're both really good. And I'm sorry, I've got to say, Spider-Man the Animated Series kicks butt. Just all kinds of butt. Its theme song is the best. And that's all I can show you because of YouTube copyright infringement policies that I don't want to break and get my video taken down. So the point goes to Spider-Man the Animated Series for that kick-ass theme song. Give me a point. Alright, next up we're going to be talking about story. Story is really, really important in anything that you do. As a matter of fact, I mean, it might sound a little counterintuitive. A story is secondary. It's like the second most important thing when you're making a story, even though it's called story. I can explain that later, maybe in a different video or something. But right now, we're talking about story. We're talking about plot, and which one of these shows had the better plot. So let's first take a look at Spider-Man the Animated Series. So Spider-Man the Animated Series was more episodic. Matter of fact, both shows were actually quite episodic. Each different episode usually had a new villain, it had a new crisis, but it would go over little mini arcs, little things that would kind of happen and go over. Like we had the arc with the Green Goblin and what eventually happened with Mary Jane. We had the arc with Harry kind of going bananas, and we had the Hobgoblin arc, and we had the Kingpin arc, and there was just quite a bit that went on inside of that show, which is pretty good. I think it had 5 seasons. It was 5 or 6 seasons, I think, was how many the show actually had. So it had a good amount of time to explore a bunch of different stuff revolving around Spider-Man, because he's had quite a long history over at Marvel. So now let's talk about Spectacular Spider-Man. That show sadly only had 2 seasons, because there was like a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo when Marvel bought back like the cartoon rights for Spider-Man from Sony. They didn't get the movie rights. They got the comic book rights. They got the cartoon rights. So they ended up trashing it in favor of doing Ultimate Spider-Man, which that's a different monster to tackle entirely. There are goods and bads about it. But Spectacular Spider-Man, even though it was short, it still had a chance to do a lot of stuff. Again, it took more of the episodic approach, where each different one was a new villain. But it still felt like it was actually going somewhere. And as a matter of fact, the creator of the show said he had 5 seasons planned out of like a progressive arc for Spider-Man, with little mini things that would happen throughout and eventually end with him graduating and starting college at Empire State University, ESU. But it sadly didn't come to fruition, which is a real pain. I would have loved to have seen what they had done with that. But there aren't as many iconic arcs from that. The only big one I can think of is the Green Goblin arc, which Green Goblin's always kind of a big arc in any Spider-Man, and the Master Planner arc in the 2nd season. Both of those were pretty big, and they were both pretty important, and they're both pretty cool. So which one do I think is better? Well, even though it might have meandered a little more, I think that Spider-Man the Animated Series had the better plot. Why? Because it simply had more time to be able to do stuff. It had a chance to go and check out all this different storied histories, and there was like a Captain America arc, and there was like, I forget what they were called. They were like the original Avengers, pretty much. And they even had the Spider Wars for the first time. That was cool to see as a kid. You can't beat that. There was Iron Spider. There was a Spider-Man with like the 6-arm mutation going on. And oh gosh, what there's Scarlet Spider. There was a bunch of different Spider-Men just suddenly working together. That was really cool. That's actually one thing Ultimate Spider-Man did better than any other cartoons. It had a really cool Spider Saga going on, Spider Wars. So even though the Spectacular only had two seasons compared to the other ones like 5, it's not really much of a contest. I still think Spider-Man the Animated Series is the superior story category, story for the show. Go ahead and give him a point, Bob. I don't know who Bob is. I don't know why I said that. Alright, now we're moving on to the 4th to last category, which I'm going to choose randomly, and I'm just going to make it the characters. We're going to be looking at the characters. So, when it comes to Spider-Man the Animated Series, that show has some really iconic characters that it has introduced to its roster. It's got Kingpin, Hobgoblin. I mean, the Lizard is always really cool. Green Goblin, he was awesome. I mean, it's like he's actually like Spider-Man's Joker pretty much in that show. They did a really good job. And because a lot of people grew up with it, they're kind of iconic and, kind of larger than life in our minds. As like these are kind of the epitome of Spider-Man characters. Now let's take a look at Spectacular Spider-Man from the 2000s. Now that show did things differently in a lot of different cases. Like there was no Kingpin. Instead, they decided to choose Tombstone as kind of this big bad guy of business with all his fingers in a bunch of different evil pies, which was an interesting change. But Tombstone was always kind of an underutilized character. But one thing that the show did do with its characters is it tried to bring them a little more modern. Like Electro in the 90s when he was like Red Skull's ultimate German evil weapon. That was a little bit of a weird change. I don't know why they did that. In the Spectacular Spider-Man, he was just working at Dr. Connor's lab where he happened to get shocked with genetically altered electric eels, which made him make like his own living electricity, his own bioelectricity or whatever. That was a cool change. Because it wasn't just like, I got struck by lightning working on a power pole. That should just kill you. It shouldn't make you a superhero, or in his case, a supervillain. So you got kind of a little more of a modern take, and you have iconic status. Which one do I think is better? It's going to sound a little sacrilegious, but I've got to go with the modern take. Now hear me out. I know that sounds bad. The 90s one is still really good. It did a great job with its characters. But the thing that the Spectacular Spider-Man did, that the other one did not, is it tried to think of Peter as kind of the central focus of all these different characters. So while the other one kind of had characters kind of come out of nowhere and they kind of come and go, this one is like, this is Peter, he's the focal point of the show, Peter Parker, and so these bad guys are usually kind of connected with him in one way or another, making it more personal, making it usually more believable and more interesting in a lot of ways. So the big ones that I can think of are, oh gosh, what were they? There's Eddie Brock and the Green Goblin. Those are the two ones that I think really kind of make my case. First off, you got Green Goblin. Instead of making him his best friend's dad, which is how he normally is, they instead made it Harry himself. Now, when I first saw this, I was like, no, you're going against the comics. You don't do that, man. Stop it. But as I've gotten older, I've thought about it, and I'm like, it actually makes it more interesting. Instead of making it his best friend's dad, it's suddenly his best friend turned adversary. That's more interesting to work with. Especially when you look at, even though they're best friends, he's still got hidden jealousy for Peter and his brains and his intellect and how he can he's charismatic enough to get along with people while he isn't. It makes Harry feel a little more kind of pushed to the wayside, where you can kind of see why he would start using his father's it was globulin green, I think is what it was. It was like a performance enhancer that was highly unstable, but he's like, I'm still going to use it because I'm going to beat Pete. And it just adds an extra layer to their relationship, to their friendship, and makes it more interesting. And the last one I've got is Eddie Brock. Now, Eddie Brock, he's normally he's like the jock villain. He's big, he's strong, he's not too bright, but he's always had it out for Spider-Man. This one does a really good job, Spectacular Spider-Man does, of bringing that and making it even more personal to Peter by giving Eddie Brock and Peter a history together. They're friends. They grew up together. Matter of fact, Peter never really had to deal with bullies as long as Eddie was there, because Eddie would protect him. Apparently, for the show anyway, their mothers were best friends and their fathers worked together. They're both scientists, and then they all died together in a plane crash going over to some convention or whatever. I don't know. They don't specify. But it makes their friendship more tangible. It feels like they're actually buddies. So when Peter starts ditching on his friends and starts running around and pictures showing up saying taken by Peter Parker when he ran away from there, it makes it seem like he's just sneaking back and profiting off of everyone else's pain. You'd see why Eddie Brock would be upset about that. And he tries to give him second chances and is like, I'll get over it. But eventually he's finally just like, maybe this is who Peter Parker really is. He's a user. And so when he ends up getting, the girl and just kind of outclasses him in almost every way, you see why he is generally peeved. And when he gets a symbiote and Spider-Man and Peter, two enemies of his, suddenly become one, it's not just like, oh, Spider-Man's this annoying person I know. It's Spider-Man is Peter. This person I used to love but now I hate. It suddenly makes sense. And it makes their rivalry of Spider-Man and Venom so much more awesome and so much deeper. So that whenever they do fight, it's even cooler. It really is. Like, you watch this clip that I'm playing right now, it is so cool to watch. Venom has always been one of the coolest Spider-Man villains. And giving them an extra layer with him and Peter just makes it all the more delicious when they do fight. And when everything comes crashing down around them. It sounds a little mean, I know, but I'm saying from a storytelling perspective, that's it. And that's why I think Spectacular Spider-Man gets the point for characters. Bing it up, or ding. Whatever the noise is. Alright, so the last point I'm going to go over, the action sequences, the fight scenes. Because you can't have a good superhero, cartoon, movie, whatever, without good action. At least it's got to have a little good action. So, which one of these did a better job with the action? So now, let's first look at Spectacular Spider-Man. That show had a lot of quick pace, it had a lot of movement, had a lot of fast, speed, because like I said, it was simplified animation, it could go a lot faster, because it didn't have to keep as much detail going through it. Then you have Spider-Man the Animated Series. I've got a couple problems with Spider-Man the Animated Series. First off, like I said before, it is kind of slower. And number two, it has to do with like the apparent protests that were going on at the time that kids shows were too violent. So Spider-Man wasn't allowed to punch. If you watch the show, he rarely ever throws a punch. Instead, most of his getting stuff done usually involves using his web or maybe a kick or something, I don't know. Because apparently kids can't figure out on their own that they can punch with their fist, they learn it by watching TV. That's the only logical thing I can think of. Sorry, censorship is a whole other topic entirely, but when it comes to Spider-Man the Animated Series, it really did hurt it. On the one hand, we got to see some creative uses for webbing. Like, he could make web nets, and he could make, hammocks, and he could make, a web parachute to stop himself. He came up with a lot of uses to try and, utilize this webbing to the best of its ability. But at the same time, too, it made the action sequences a lot slower, because instead of punching and trying to knock down your opponent, you're trying to figure out how to web them up or incapacitate them, which doesn't really work as well. But when it comes to Spectacular Spider-Man, it was fast. It was, quick. But one of the things I really liked about it is that Spider-Man never tried to, just try to outpower his opponents most of the time. A lot of the times he tried to outsmart them or figure out a way to beat them. Like when he fought Electro, he had to be using a glove, that was a rubber glove, to keep himself insulated from the electricity, and he ended up short-circuiting him in a pool. Versing Rhino, he figured out that, he's got this indestructible skin, but that means he can't sweat. So by knocking him into a steam tunnel, he overheated him until the guy just passed right on out. This is cool. He's outthinking his opponents as opposed to outfighting them. That does mean that none of that happens, because we do have the Sinister Six pop up, And it's a really cool fight scene both times. They pop up twice, if I remember correctly. First time, it was like everyone one-on-one against Black Suit Peter, and it's only because of the black suit he's able to actually come out on top. The other time, it was like 6 of them, but they were doing 2-on-2-on-2. Each one progressively teaming up and beating them down. And again, he still had to figure out a way to outsmart them, instead of just trying to outpower them, because he usually can't. But it makes for a more interesting show when you see him thinking about it and using his science smarts to go like, well, let me see if I can, figure this out. Not that that doesn't happen in the animated series. Matter of fact, he does that quite a few times. But while in Spectacular, he still can throw a punch and kick and still web up bad guys and throw them into a wall. Spider-Man the Animated Series still had limitations put onto it because of parent groups, and that severely hurt, it hurt the show. It didn't work out as well, which is why I'm giving my point for the best action sequences to the Spectacular Spider-Man. Alright, and so in my personal opinion, I think that the Spectacular Spider-Man is a better show than Spider-Man the Animated Series. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't love Spider-Man the Animated Series. I really do. I mean, it's part of my childhood. I grew up with it. But the show itself is still really good. It's a solid show. Both of them kind of ended prematurely. Even Spider-Man the Animated Series, it ended on a cliffhanger. Spider-Man was with Madam Web. They were going to go find Mary Jane. And then it sadly just kind of ended. It just kind of stopped. Which, I mean, I'm not quite sure why. I think maybe just ran out of money, or maybe there was some sort of legal trouble. And Spectacular Spider-Man was cut off after only a couple of seasons when the guy had like 5. So both of them sadly cut out of their prime. We got a new one coming out, but I haven't heard good things about it. It's just called Marvel Spider-Man, I think is what it's called. I haven't heard good things about it, so maybe I'll check it out later and tell you what I think about it. Looking forward to that. But in the meantime, this is Channel Master Jake. Make sure to hug someone you love today, and I'll catch you dudes later. Bye.